Hey guys, thanks for tuning back into the channel. We've got a good episode for you today. A lot of people really like the episodes that are about 5 things that you need to know to catch more fish. So we're bringing it back today. And today's episode is going to be 5 things that you need to know about milfoil to help you catch more fish. You know, no matter where you're at in the country, milfoil has a love-hate relationship, right? If you're an angler, you probably really like milfoil. If you're a homeowner or a state agency, you're probably consistently battling milfoil and you're not a big fan of it. But the truth is, it's pretty much spread throughout the country now, and therefore all of us at some point will probably run into it. So we need to be familiar with it. We need to know some little things about it that will help us become better anglers. So that's why we're going to do the 5 things that you need to know about milfoil. So the first thing that you need to know is the depth at which it grows. Milfoil will grow out to 10 foot of water. Occasionally you'll get it where it's a slightly deeper than that in super clear water. But the reason that it caps out at 10 feet is because the growth span of the plant is really about 10 foot. And the whole life cycle of milfoil is to grow to the surface so that once it hits the surface, it can sprout its flowers, which has the seeds, and you know that's how it can spread. It's not the only way it spreads, but it's one of the ways it can spread. So the plant wants to grow there. But if the max life cycle of the plant or max length is roughly 10 foot, you just don't find it too much further than that. That's one reason why when you do have it, you get super solid walls of it. Like it just grows out and then stops and you get a solid wall of it. So you need to be familiar with that, because in a lot of lakes where it has really established itself, it does kind of take out a lot of the native weeds where it grows and becomes the primary weed that the fish are using in that lake. So if you're going to a new lake that has milfoil, you might want to start your concentration in that 10 foot of water or less. Normally the milfoil is going to grow in 3 foot of water to that 10 foot range. In my opinion, the best range is like 4 to 8, but you can have it grow up to about a couple of foot of water. It doesn't really grow much shallower than that, but it's just something that you need to be familiar with, because in the lakes that has milfoil, it really is one of the primary structures for the fish to live in, and therefore it's a really good place to start your approach when you hit that body of water. So that's the first thing. The second thing kind of goes along with that. It's the fact that the milfoil stalks have hollow chambers in them, which causes the plant to float. And that helps the plant get to the surface, right? That's what helps it get to the point where it can get its flowers above the water. The key to that is because of the fact that the stalks float, it will actually spread around the surface and create those giant mats, right? So those giant mats are what create those, you know, the dense tops that the fish want to get under, and those chambers that the fish can swim through and create those really good strike zones underneath it. So it's really important to understand that just because you go out and you see a carpet of milfoil, it may not actually be that thick underneath. It's got a lot of room for those fish to swim about. The stalks are generally, you know, 6 inches to a foot apart, which creates really good pathways underneath those mats. So it's not as thick as you would think. It's not necessarily like a hydrilla clump or a coontail clump that just are super dense. You can't even get your bait through it. The other thing to know with the fact that those stalks float is that when they get torn up and chopped up by boat traffic or people pulling them out, they float to the bank, and they create really good opportunities to fish when they're pushed up against the bank and you get these floating mats of torn up milfoil that usually go all overlooked in the lakes that have good milfoil, because people go directly to that milfoil clump that's offshore or in a bay or wherever. They're staying away from the bank in those instances, And they're missing out on the opportunity of a lot of that chopped up milfoil that's created mats along the bank, along docks or seawalls, that type of stuff. So don't overlook that. It's important to know that those stalks, once they're chopped up, they're floating somewhere, and they usually will create mats. So that's the second thing to understand. The third thing goes back to the way the plant grows. You get these colonies of plants that grow really thick walls, and those walls will create really good shade lines. And a lot of times people go direct to the milfoil and they just start flipping the milfoil, right? Because that's where the fish should be. But when you get these shade lines based on the direction of the sun, so that shade line could rotate around a clump of milfoil throughout the day, but those shade lines, if you have milfoil growing in 8 to 10 feet, can be 10 foot off of that milfoil. So those fish a lot of times will roam that outside edge, whether it's right on the edge or 5-6 feet off the edge. So don't think you have to cast into the milfoil to catch fish. I've had a lot of my best days fishing the edges of milfoil and not catching the fish inside of the milfoil. So you want to be aware that those walls are there and that there are really good shade lines that come off those walls. Based on the sun position, one side may have it where the sun's penetrating into that milfoil clump, and the other side will have the shade line. So if you're fishing the side that's got the sun penetrating it, you may have to cast further into the milfoil to get those fish to bite, because just like the other side, if the sun's penetrating in, that sunlight may be actually getting under that milfoil for 5-6 feet inside of it. So that's the third thing. The fourth thing is that the fish will usually group up really good in those milfoil areas. So one of the biggest tips I have for you is if you catch a fish flipping into the milfoil, always make a second cast to that exact same spot. I don't know why, but there are times you can go in and you can continue to cast right into the same hole you pulled a fish out of and catch 2, 3, 4 more fish. They really group up tightly in those specific areas of milfoil. It's like they just school up in it, just like they'd be schooling up on a little rock point or on an isolated boulder, something like that. They're just doing it inside of the weed clump. So if you get bit, slow down and really work that area well, because there's probably more than one fish. So that's the fourth thing. The fifth thing just has to do with, again, the fact that they create these giant walls, right? So one of the biggest environmental issues that state agencies and people have regarding milfoil is that they create like current dams, or they block current, natural current, whether that's flowing current, say coming down a river or a waterway, or that's wind current. It's just the fact that it blocks the current, and because of that, then sediments, filters in certain places, and you can have issues on a lake because you don't have that flow that you had at one point. Well, the key to that, guys, is to know that then is creating very opportune places to fish that milfoil. So if you've got a big clump of milfoil, there's going to be key areas, and a lot of times those areas are the areas that are going to be blocking that current. So if you have a point that comes out, or you have an indent, where you've got a moon shape because the current's coming in and the milfoil's funneling it back out, those are key areas to start your approach to breaking down a milfoil lake. It's those exact spots that the environmental agencies don't like, because it creates current breaks that the fish are using, because it's allowing them a place to hide, and the current's coming to the milfoil, and the milfoil's directing it in a way that the fish are utilizing to eat. So it's important to know that. Points, any sort of long strips can be good. It's just anything where, if you've got natural flow, it's easy because you can see the current coming by it. It may change every day based on wind direction. On one day, if the wind's blowing from the north, you may have a certain point of milfoil that's better. If the wind switches from the west another day, you may have a different point or a different section of milfoil. But just be aware that whatever direction the wind's blowing or the natural current is, the milfoil is deflecting it in some manner, and those are going to create high percentage spots for you guys to fish. So those were 5 things to help you catch more fish out of a lake that has milfoil. Truly, I love fishing milfoil lakes. I think they produce some giant fish normally and can create absolutely phenomenal fishing. I understand there's issues with it, but while you've got a lake with it, you might as well go out and take advantage of it. So use these to help you catch more fish. I hope it was helpful. If it was, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already, share it on your social media pages, and stay tuned. New tips and tricks coming out tomorrow.